Hi folks, welcome to this first of a two-part series of online video lessons providing an introduction to basic concepts in argument. In this first video of the series, we'll define argumentation and argument based on discussion of these concepts from Inch and Tudor's textbook, Critical Thinking and Communication. We'll also look at the key elements of argument, define what those pieces of argument are, and talk especially about how these four elements interact with one another in order for an argument to function effectively. Now, when we're talking about the broader field of argumentation, according to Inch and Tudor, we can understand it as the process of making arguments intended to justify beliefs, attitudes, and values so as to influence others. And I've added to this definition the study of this process as well. Argumentation is its own academic and professional field of research and practice. What is it that it's researching and practicing? Well, it's the rest of the definition. Now, on first glance, it looks pretty obvious. Argumentation is the study of argument, sure. But there's three elements of this definition that we should pay a little attention to. First of all, we need to remember that argument is a process. Specifically, it's a process of communication and social interaction. It's not just something that we put together, say writing it down in the paragraph of an essay, and then just putting it out there and we're done. We need to think about arguments in terms of the interaction of various pieces of thoughts and symbols and behaviors, the interactions between arguers and audiences and context. So there's a broader process involved, and it's not just putting together something and putting it out there. The second piece we need to pay attention to is that we're talking about messages that are intended to justify beliefs, attitudes, and values. We don't want to make the mistake of assuming that an argument is essentially asserting your opinion as loudly and emotionally and in as annoying fashion as possible. That's what happens on daytime talk shows. That's not what happens in argument. Argument is about justification. In other words, providing good reasons, providing a sound rationale for the opinion that you want accepted. The third piece that's important is that the reason that we do this is to influence others. In other words, it's not about coercive browbeating. It's not about unconscious, underhanded manipulation. What it's about is the process of social influence via persuasive communication. We're trying to influence the beliefs, values, and attitudes of others so that an audience, based on their free will, can make a decision to come closer to accepting our position than perhaps they were before I started the argument. So if I'm going to engage in this process of justifying beliefs to influence others, how do we go about this? That's where the basic definition of argument comes in. According to Inch and Tudor, an argument is a set of statements in which a claim is made, support is offered for it, and there's an attempt to influence others in a context of disagreement. We've talked about the influence piece before. What we need to do now is to look at these other elements, the claim, the support, and the context of disagreement, to see just how arguments are actually put together. This is a fundamental idea, and if you can get these four basic building blocks and the relationships between them, you'll have a really good understanding not just how to produce arguments, but also how to analyze and critically evaluate them. So what are these elements? Well, we're going to have a context of disagreement, which is going to be the place where the entire argument is going to reside. Within that context of disagreement, an arguer is going to offer a claim. They're going to provide evidence to support that claim, and so they're going to need to establish a relevant, significant relationship between that evidence and the claim. If the evidence doesn't support the claim, then we're not going to have a functional argument. But we can't just leave it at this, because how do we know that the evidence is relevant to support the claim? That's where the reasoning comes in. The reasoning is going to provide the bridge so that we know if the evidence is true and the reasoning makes sense, then by logical extension, we should accept the claim. Now let's take these pieces one by one and see how they work. A context of disagreement, according to Inch and Tudor, is understood primarily through this really important concept. Argument contexts grow out of the confluence of arguer, question or need, and audience. What does this mean? Well, it means essentially that arguments are never going to exist in a vacuum. They're always going to exist in a broader matrix of material conditions, situations, environments, the kinds of things that all come together, including past history and knowledge, present activities and events, possibilities for the future. It's a time and a space and a whole collection of different variables that are going to come together to make argument necessary. And so they're going to be made of various pieces. The question or need is essentially going to refer to what is the problem or what is the dispute or disagreement that needs to get resolved. Why is it that we're going to argue in the first place? The arguer is going to argue for particular reasons, and those reasons are going to be motivated in large part by those contextual elements. But the arguer is going to have a big stake in interpreting and understanding what those contextual elements mean and why that arguer is going to argue in the first place and how they're going to argue. And then, of course, because the reason for argument is influencing an audience, who that audience is, what their identity and backgrounds and values and beliefs and feelings and all that kind of stuff, the audience is going to be absolutely essential in defining this broader context. So we need to remember that when we look at the relationship between claim, evidence, and reasoning, the surrounding context is going to inform all of this. So within this context, the basic piece of a claim is an expressed opinion or conclusion that the arguer wants presented. This idea is pretty straightforward. This is the idea that I want you to accept if I'm arguing and you're the audience that I'm arguing for or to. We understand evidence as facts or conditions that are objectively observable, beliefs or statements generally accepted as true by the recipients, or conclusions previously established. An important thing to think about, and in a subsequent video lesson, we'll talk more about this concept. It's important to not fall into the trap that a lot of beginning argumentation students do, which is thinking that evidence for an argument must be, this phrase always gives me the willies, cold, hard facts. It should just be cold, hard facts. Well, most arguments are not comprised of simply cold, hard facts all by themselves. If you don't have a claim which draws a conclusion from that evidence, you don't have an argument. And claims are never cold, hard facts. Often reasoning isn't either. But even when we're talking about evidence, the information, the support that you use to justify your claim doesn't necessarily have to be factual. Sometimes beliefs or opinions can count as evidence. Maybe, for instance, if we're having a discussion of where to go to dinner tonight, and I make the claim that we should go to Applebee's instead of Chili's, and I support that claim with the following piece of evidence: Applebee's has a better, more attentive wait staff than Chili's does. That is not a fact. That is a value position. That is an opinion that I have about the wait staff. And but if you accept that opinion as true, it functions as evidence. Well, let's say you don't necessarily accept that position as true. Well, then what we can also use as evidence is conclusions previously established. So let's say you ask me, I haven't been to Applebee's or Chili's. How do you know that Applebee's has the better wait staff? Well, then if I provide for you as additional evidence for this brand new claim that Applebee's has a better wait staff, my observations that every time that I've gone to Applebee's and Chili's, I've noticed that the Applebee's wait staff is much more attentive. They're really good about refilling drinks and suggesting good menu items, and they really make sure that we're happy, whereas the folks at Chili's don't pay a lot of attention to us. They're overworked, and so they really don't get us what we need. And those could be factual observations that I made in order to establish the truth of my belief that Applebee's has a better wait staff. So if that first preliminary argument convinces you, then that opinion that I have that Applebee's has a better wait staff becomes a previously established conclusion that I can use as evidence to prove the claim that we should go to Applebee's and not Chili's. So in brief, evidence is often factual but does not necessarily have to be factual. And we also know that evidence by itself can't justify a claim. We also need to have reasoning. According to Inch and Tudor, reasoning constructs a rational link between the evidence and the claim and authorizes the step we make when we draw a conclusion. And I've said here that you can think about this as an inferential leap. An inference is essentially when we move from something that's been established to something that hasn't yet been established. Essentially, we're taking a logical or a rational leap from one point to another point. And what reasoning is going to do is it's going to answer the following question. If evidence is reasons why the claim is true, well, why does that evidence make the claim true? Why is the evidence relevant? That's where the reasoning comes in. The reasoning is whatever sort of logical relationship or conclusion or some previously established premise that the audience agrees with. enables the argument to work something like this. If I accept the evidence as true, and I accept the reasoning as sound, as valid, as reasonable, then by logical extension, I'm going to accept the claim as true because those three pieces are connected. Let's see how this operates in a simple sample argument. I'm going to show you an advertisement from the Ted Cruz for President campaign during the Republican presidential primaries in 2016. This is an ad entitled Cruz Commander, and it was posted on YouTube on January 13, 2016. The ad features Duck Dynasty star Phil Robertson. If you're familiar with the character or you're familiar with the show, you might know that Phil Robertson, the patriarch of the Duck Dynasty family, is a larger-than-life character. Robertson has been identified as not only staunchly politically conservative, but he has been a really controversial and, in some cases, extreme spokesperson for some conservative social and cultural beliefs. And so, watch this advertisement. And then once we see it, I'll lay down step by step how this ad functions as an effective argument based on the four pieces or characteristic elements of argument we've talked about so far.
My qualifications for President of the United States are rather narrow. Is he or she godly? Does he or she love us? Can he or she do the job? And finally, would they kill a duck and put him in a pot and make him a good duck gumbo? I've looked at the candidates. Ted Cruz is my man. He fits the bill. He's godly. He loves us. He's the man for the job, and he will go duck hunting, because today we're going. Ted Cruz is my man. I'm voting for him.
Cruz, the reason we're going to vote for you, all of us, is because you're one of us, my man. That's why we're voting for you. It's now or never.
Okay, so let's see how this argument functions. First of all, we need to think about the claim. Ted Cruz is my man. I'm voting for him. He fits the bill. Bill. Duck Bill. See what I did there? I'll see what he did there. Anyway, Robertson makes the claim pretty straightforward. He provides as evidence to support his claim, Ted Cruz is godly, he loves us, he's a man for the job, and he will go duck hunting. Now, why are those four pieces of information relevant to establish the truth of Robertson's claim? Well, it actually, in this case, is provided explicitly for Robertson at the very beginning of the ad, where he establishes his criteria for who he's going to vote for president, who would make a good president in Robertson's eyes. Someone who is godly, someone who loves us, someone who can do the job, and someone who will go duck hunting and put that duck in a nice duck gumbo. Now, for most folks looking at this argument, they might look at this criteria and see, for instance, the third piece, someone who can do the job would be a good candidate for president. Ted Cruz can do the job, therefore you could vote for him. That is a particular logical construction of evidence and reasoning and claim that most people might be able to be on board with. But when you look at some of these other pieces, for some folks out there, whether or not someone is a godly person, why is that relevant to be president? For some people, it's absolutely crucial. For many other people, it's irrelevant. Whether or not somebody loves us or not, again, lots of people could potentially take issue with whether someone needs to love us in order to be an effective executive leader and commander-in-chief. And whether or not someone's willing to go duck hunting, why in the world do you need to do that to be president, right?
It's rabbit season, duck season, rabbit season, duck season, rabbit season, duck season, rabbit season, rabbit season, duck season, rabbit season. I say it's duck season, and I say fire. Let's try that again.
Well, the important thing to remember is this fourth piece, the context of disagreement. When we think about the context for this argument, there are two really important social constructs that are going to inform the way that this whole argument operates. The first is the 2016 Republican presidential primaries. When folks are voting in a presidential primary, They're selecting from a number of people in the same party who they want their party's nominee for the general election to be. And in presidential primary elections, those who are voting tend to be more ideologically motivated than general election audiences who tend to be middle of the road. So in Democratic primaries, voters tend to be more liberal or progressive. In Republican primaries, they tend to be more conservative. So Ted Cruz is running for president against a large field of other presidential candidates, and he's trying to establish himself for conservative voters that he is the strongest and most authentic conservative Republican in the race. This group is potentially going to intersect with another important group that this ad targets, and that is the fan audience of Duck Dynasty. This particular reality show has a large number of fans, but there is a significant number, if not a majority, of Duck Dynasty fans that identify themselves as socially and culturally conservative, the kind of people that are impressed by Phil Robertson and agree with a lot of his points of view and the way that he presents those points of view. So what Ted Cruz is doing here is he's looking at the intersection between these really two important groups. Duck Dynasty fans, who are going to potentially be impressed and motivated and persuaded by the celebrity endorsement of Phil Robertson, as well as conservative Republican voters. And so getting Duck Dynasty voters who might not necessarily have been as engaged in the election process to consider Ted Cruz seriously as a conservative candidate for president is the reason why this argument is constructed in the way that it is. For many, many Americans, this is not going to be a logical or persuasive argument. But in the context of the Republican presidential primaries, for the target audience that Ted Cruz is looking to persuade, this is an argument that may make a lot of sense. And it certainly might be emotionally and credibility-wise persuasive. So, what you need to remember as you think about these basic building blocks of argument is, first of all, how is argument defined? Remembering that it's not just something that we put together and put out there, but it is a process of social communication. It's a process that not just puts ideas out there and asserts them, but provides justification or rationale for them. And it's a process of communication that's intended to influence an audience. And that process of social influence and justification for points is defined by four key elements and their interaction. The context of disagreement, and then the three pieces of argument that exist within that context: the claim, the evidence, and the reasoning. If you have any questions or concerns about these ideas, just let me know. Otherwise, I'll see you next time.